Hi everyone, here's the book chemist once again. Today I'm reviewing the Three Body Problem trilogy by Liu Cixin. A science fiction trilogy that I knew absolutely nothing about. I decided to read it off the strand of the first novel in the trilogy, the reputation it has in the sci-fi fantasy world, and after a friend recommended the series too. I went in blind and I was absolutely swept away. It was one of the most gripping and most mind-bending reading experiences of the last few years. This is, I would say, very much hard science fiction, as in science fiction where a lot of importance is put on the science aspect of the genre. Science plays an important role. And there's lots of scientific lingo, lots of theoretical elements contribute to the plot, the poetics of these novels. But I would say that shouldn't put you off, because I'm not somebody who's particularly into the hard sciences, or even, I would say, necessarily curious or fascinated by them, and I was still engrossed all the way through. I would say that the most exciting part about the Three Body Problem trilogy, I'm talking here about each of these three individually great books, is how it constantly defies your expectations and subverts your assumptions about what this series is and what it's about. How it can really start doing something completely different from what it was doing just 2 pages prior. A lot of the fun reading the books came from just trying to wrap my head around the mind-bending concepts and the strange far-flung worlds that the book was conveying, and the concepts that it was presenting, the way it stretched. It seemed to stretch the very limits of my imagination, my capacity for thought, and for conceiving a possible future. It reminded me of the way the most daring postmodern fiction can do that, as much as, of course, the best science fiction. It really shows how language can shape a reality in ways that are sometimes paradoxical and often unexpected. It's really hard to talk about the Three Body Problem and the full series without spoiling what happens in these books, and I won't, because I think the surprise of discovering what these books are about, of discovering their plot, is again one of the great strengths and the great sources of fun that you're going to discover as you read the trilogy. All I'll say, to keep it really succinct, is that the books are about the future, a future shaped by an occurrence that happens early in the 21st century, when something happens in the solar system that is probably the most important thing to happen in this corner of the universe, maybe since the beginning of time, or at least since the dawn of life on Earth. So sure, it is a science fiction series in the canonical sense of the term. It's about an imagined future. You're going to, in the course of the series, travel on spaceships, visit the edges of the solar system and beyond. But it's also a strangely, eternally recurring narrative that brings to mind the works of Italo Calvino, novels such as If on a Winter's Night a Traveler or Invisible Cities. It can also be a reflection on the nature of love and the connection between our dreams and empirical reality, a book about some kind of ethereal, impossible romance that brings to mind, at least to me, it brought to mind the novels of Murakami. It can dedicate quite a long time to allegorical fairy tales that go on for perhaps a little bit too long. It can be all of these things and more. To me, underneath all of these surprises and different genres and different narrative styles and registers, the Three Body Problem is ultimately about human nature, about our thirst for enlightenment and a way forward that allows us to live full lives supporting each other. And it's also about the evil and greed that often ensures our survival as a species in a often cruel, often competitive world. Ultimately, the question of the book is which aspects of our nature is more prominent. what can we possibly sacrifice while still remaining human, while preserving our humanity? The three books in the series are very distinctive. They each have their individual feeling and atmosphere. And while they each contain multitudes, I would say that the Three Body Problem, the original book, is maybe the book on the most human scale. In many ways, it's a historical novel and a bit of a detective novel about a relatively understandable, even relatable characters facing a paradoxical situation. The Dark Forest instead moves into the future and becomes quite an epic space opera, and it must have the most thrilling and tense final few pages of any novel I've read, possibly ever, really. And then finally, the Death's End, the final chapter in the trilogy, just takes everything that made the first two books great and escalates it and throws it out the window at the same time and becomes exponentially more mind-blowing, complex, challenging in a stimulating rather than difficult way. As I mentioned before, they all contain a lot of science and a lot of theories about space, the nature of time, the nature of matter. And I'll be damned if I've ever understood what a sophon is supposed to be. But even while not fully grasping all of the science talk in the books, that never came in the way of my enjoyment of the plot, my understanding of the characters' motives and angles. Honestly, all slightly challenging, daring fiction, even Pynchon, Angela Carter, they all come with their twisty passages that are sometimes hard to wrap your head around, but you can still soldier through them and you can still appreciate the broader things that the book is trying to achieve. All three books, as I said, are amazing. Death's End at times had me in tears or had me feeling physically ill with concern for what was going to happen to these made-up fictional people. But I would say that if I had to pick my favorite, it would definitely be the second book, The Dark Forest. That was the most engrossing, the most rewarding I found. If you're maybe a bit intimidated by the size of the series, I can show you the books because I read them through the library, but each of them is quite sizable. I would say that the first book or the first two books can be read as self-conclusive science fiction novels. And obviously, while I recommend the full series, you can always just pick up the first one, see what you think, and if it's not for you, you can count it as a self-conclusive narrative. Oh, and a quick note to warn you to please avoid the back cover of The Dark Forest and the copy on the back of the book, because it's one of those cases, and I've seen a few in my career as a reader, where the back cover basically gives away the main aspect of the plot. It basically gives away the main twist in the book. I don't know why publishers do that. It's ridiculous to me. Reading The Three Body Problem brought me back to the thrills I experienced reading the great books of science fiction as a teenager, these works of amazing imagination. Asimov, Jack Finney, H.G. Wells. These are books that try to pack quite a lot of ideas in stories that are already heavy with a lot of action and a lot of plot. And as such, they take risks that sometimes pay off and sometimes come across as somewhat clumsy. To give you a practical example, I wasn't convinced in the third book in the series, in Death's End, about the whole reflection on how femininity is associated in the book with maybe optimism, maybe a certain degree of irrationality. But while disagreeing with that view, I understood that the book was trying to draw a broader reflection on, I think, ultimately on pacifism and on some of its concerns, some of its problems. And I say that as a pacifist myself. The bottom line issue there is, well, what do you do when the other guy is not a pacifist? That leaves you in a bit of a pickle, doesn't it? A reflection I really appreciated in the third book too, Death's End again, is this idea that various factions warring against each other in the course of the novel are perceived as monstrous or heroic at different points in history, depending on the changing fortunes of history. And after the fact, people assume that if they'd been alive at that time, they certainly would have sided with the heroic people, with the faction that was in the right. I think it's a powerful reflection about the way we see and relate to history, and just gives you a sense about the endless kind of reflections, of discussions that these novels raise outside the domain of its immediate story and the immediate concerns of the characters. A paradoxical thing also happened with Three Body Problem, where the more I ventured into the far-flung future, the more the concerns of the characters and the things they had to deal with felt familiar and urgent to me. Toward the end of the series, because of the great technological advancements that the characters' world has encountered in the course of the series, the characters reflect on this idea that basically they have to make decisions that have an impact for the fate of entire worlds, for the fate of the universe, perhaps. They have to make decisions that should rightly belong to gods. And in some ways, that reminded me of our current predicament, where as we're facing things such as economic crisis, definitely the environmental crisis, where we're facing the decisions that are going to shape the future of Earth. And it feels like some of the decisions we're called to make on a daily basis sometimes feel outsized compared to our own personal scope. Whether your choices impact the Earth and cause pollution, cause damage to the environment, that's the kind of concerns that feels greater than you as just one person, just one life. I was absolutely blown away. I really loved the series. The last sci-fi fantasy series that I liked so much was N.K. Jemisin's Broken Earth trilogy a few years back, and I enjoyed Liu Cixin's books just as much. I couldn't recommend it more to any fan of science fiction. I'm late to the game, so if you're a science fiction fan, you've probably read these books already. But I would also recommend it to anybody who's looking for an imaginative series, an imaginative read, and is maybe not afraid of the occasional spaceship cropping up in their fiction. I have a final reflection, but that is very spoily, so if you haven't read the series, stop the video now. Thanks so much for watching it. The final comment I wanted to make is that the final message of the series at the very end of Death's End really elevated it in my eyes. When one tells Chang that she did the right choice, first as the sword holder, and later on when she was tasked with deciding whether she was going to cause a war about light speed research or whether she would try to avoid it, and she decided to avoid it, and she chose peace, and that was the right choice. That was a message that I found really impactful and really spoke to me, and because I believe in the same, I believe it truly, and it was phrased and argumented beautifully in the course of this series. This idea that choosing peace, which sounds easy, but as you'll know if you've read the series, it's much harder than that, is the right choice. Despite the consequences and some of the terrible consequences of that, once again, I think it's a very powerful message. I also thought that the final decision they have to make at the end of the series, whether to continue living in relative comfort in their own private universe, or whether they should sacrifice it in the hope that that would contribute to the well-being of the broader universe. That also spoke to me very closely of our own concerns, definitely in large parts of the world today, where we have to decide similar things. Are we just going to ignore what's happening to the environment, what's happening to the world in the name of our own comfort, or are we going to try our best to mitigate the destruction and find a way to create a world that's going to be livable for more of us, and it's going to survive for longer. They're cool books, guys. They're really good books. I was really impressed, and I had a ton of fun. And I hope you had a lot of fun with them too. If you did, please let me know in the comments, but do let me know even if you didn't like the series. And yeah, if you think I should read more by the author, do let me know. Always open to recommendations. Thanks so much for watching the video. Bye, everybody.